Well, hello and welcome to a special Saturday extended episode of Daily Union, podcast with the simple aim of encouraging others in Christ. I'm your host, Josh Merrick, and if you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know that the typical rhythm and resting heart rate of this podcast is those Monday through Friday kind of bite-sized gospel-rich words of encouragement that we bring to you, and we bring to you through a variety of voices every day, each week. But we thought that it'd be fun, kind of in this life stage of the church, to, on occasion, to offer some bigger bites of encouragement through some extended episodes, and just to bring on just a variety of voices here and there with a special Saturday episode. And so that's what we're doing now. I have the privilege of having a special guest with me. He's actually one of our regular voices on Daily Union. He comes to you every Thursday, and he's a pastor in the great town of Columbia, Tennessee. I have with me special guest Patrick Crandall. He's the pastor of Covenant Grace Church there in Columbia, Tennessee. Patrick, thanks so much for joining us, brother.
Thanks for having me, Josh. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, in a typical, I'm no podcast expert, but I think when you're putting on an episode and you're talking about a specific topic with a guest, it's probably good protocol to invite the guest to share more about them, or for me to talk more about the guest. But essentially, that is the essence of today's episode, where we're just really getting to know you, Patrick, on a personal level. We thought that it'd be great just to, you're coming to us every Thursday on this podcast, and for the listener out there, it's like, okay, I'm liking what he's having to say here, but I don't know this guy, and so I think it's helpful, just as they're hearing more of you each week, just to know Patrick a little bit better. We thought that it'd be great just to have kind of a meet and greet type episode with you, and so really that's what we want to do today, is just to get to know Patrick, the Christian, Patrick, the pastor, Patrick, the man, the myth, the legend, all that good stuff. And no, just to get to know you better, just to hear a little bit more about your journey, just to chat life and faith with you, and trust that the Lord will guide the conversation and just ultimately encourage the listeners out there. So thanks again for joining. Before we jump in, I just real briefly, just to kind of set the table a little bit for the conversation before kind of letting you kind of take the baton and run with it. I just like to just give some context about how you and I know one another, and how like our lives intersected. So Patrick and I have known each other for almost 2 years, kind of a little under 2 years now. For me, my wife and I, we were out we're in Wabash, Indiana now, but at the time we were out in Phoenix, Arizona, and we were with a church family out there, doing life and ministry out there. And for me personally, it had been kind of 2 years into a journey of where I was kind of coming to just found my really a lot of shifts taking place in my life, from just theological ministry, all from those types of standpoints. And ultimately, I found myself in a context where I kind of felt like starting to feel a little bit like a fish out of water. And I was starting to just sense that it was clear that that the Lord was maybe guiding us elsewhere in terms of local church ministry and local church family to be a part of futuristically. And it was about that time, almost 2 years ago, where I was introduced to Patrick via common friends, Justin Purdue and John Moffat, and their podcast called Theocast. And they're along with John and Justin and Patrick, they're a part of a new church network that I'm sure Patrick may share a little bit about later. But I was interested in that church network, and that's how I was first introduced to Patrick. And there was a big Zoom call and their initial meeting of just them setting out to hopefully see this church network formally take birth. And I just remember sitting and listening to Patrick introduce himself, and it was just as he was sharing a little bit about his own journey in ministry and pastoring. I mean, just everything that he was saying was almost like he was speaking directly to what I was kind of wrestling with in my current context. And so I made sure to kind of shoot him a private message. And so we've been able to personally connect since then. And I know over the past couple years, Patrick has just been just really influenced my life in a great way, just personally. And for us, my wife and I, we our our tenure with our church at that time, it came to an abrupt and unexpected end. And so I was at that point, Patrick was there. We had just a newfound relationship where he was able to speak encouragement and love into my life and just help me process through a lot of different things. And so not only from a personal standpoint, he's been so influential to me, and the Lord has used him, but also just from a pastoral preaching ministry, just kind of being a fly on the wall miles away, just hearing stories about how he's navigating a ministry now and in the context that he's in. And but yeah, Patrick, you've been such a blessing, man, in my life, in our short-lived relationship and knowing one another. And so I appreciate that from you. But that's kind of the context of him and I getting to know one another. And just he was one of the guys in contemplating Daily Union podcast of, man, I'd love to get other just Christ-centered, gospel-rich voices on here that could just hopefully encourage others in the Lord. And Patrick was, one of those guys at the top of the list, because I know his preaching is just, even as I've listened from afar, has been an encouragement to me, and just continually pointing others to Christ and who he is and what he's done, what he continues to do for us. And so and you'll learn just a little bit more about Patrick's journey. One of the things that I appreciate about his preaching is just, it's clear that the Lord has used Patrick's journey and experience in the past to really bring a unique perspective to the pulpit, just in terms of some of the things that Patrick has walked through in his life. And so, but anyways, I'm grateful for you, Patrick. Grateful to have you here. I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to kind of bounce it over to you now. And just, I think in starting this kind of meet and greet episode, I'd love to just kind of get a basic intro from you. Just hearing a little bit more about you, family, education, maybe certain passions or hobbies that you enjoy. But yeah, maybe just start us out with some of those basic things for us.
Sure. You want the little bio? We can do that. Yeah, but before I do, I just want to echo back, Josh. It's been definitely a blessing to get to know you and your family too over these last nearly 2 years. That has definitely gone both ways, and it's been fun to walk alongside you in the season of a lot of transition and change, and see the Lord keep and care for you guys through that and lead to what He has for you. And I'm excited to keep watching that and participating, from a couple states away. So it's definitely been a mutual thing. But with that, yeah. So I live down in Columbia, Tennessee. I've been here for about 4 years with my wife, Susan, and I've got 2 kids, Caden and Riley. They're 7 and 5, and they are bundles of energy and a great joy to us. Love my family. It's definitely a gift, and love my church. We planted Covenant Grace we just had 3 years last Sunday. We marked our 3-year mark since we started having services on Sunday morning. So that was definitely a sign of God's grace. Because that's certainly the reason why it started it all and why we've made it these 3 years, and we've experienced much of His kindness along the way. So when I'm not doing family and pastoring, which is the vast majority of my time, I love to read, love sports, all the sports, big sports guy. Football and basketball are the primary two. So when I get a little
Any
free time,
particular teams out there that you're rooting for?
Yeah, so I grew up near Detroit, primarily growing up. So all my sports loyalties were formed in the great state of Michigan. So Pistons fan, Lions fan, all things Detroit is where I'm at. So it's
Bro,
good
needless
times
to
on the
say, a
football
huge Barry
front.
Sanders fan growing up, like I was.
That was my child. Barry Sanders was my childhood. Yep, greatest running back of all time. Won't be able
Absolutely.
to convince me otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love it. Love it.
So that's me. Love just hanging out with people.
Mhm.
And that's about it. It's fairly simple life. Not a whole lot else going on. Family, friends, pastoring, a little sports sprinkled in, and I'm pretty good.
Yeah. Love it. Good stuff. Well, yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about you, Patrick, just specifically in terms of Patrick the Christian, just this common life and working your way through this life and just coming to life and faith in Jesus Christ, and really what that process looked like, maybe your upbringing and maybe some specific influences or people or factors that came along that way that the Lord had maybe used to ultimately bring you to faith. But yeah, just be willing just to maybe share that journey of really coming to faith in Christ and maybe since then kind of what that journey since has looked like.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I had the blessing of being raised by Christian parents, newly Christian parents. So they came to Christ shortly. My mom, while she was pregnant with me, my dad a little bit
Mm,
earlier than that. They were fairly new, but they had me in an evangelical church where I heard the gospel faithfully and consistently from a very young age, which was such a gift I realize more and better now, even than I did then, as I've grown in my appreciation for the ordinary means of grace and things like that.
yeah.
But I professed faith in Christ when I was 6, was baptized when I was 7. Um, when you profess faith that young, it's always easy to kind of look back and think like, well, how much did I really understand and how much
Mhm.
did I get?
Yeah.
And theologically is my understanding of regeneration and the Lord's work in salvation. That's not something I really concern myself with too much anymore. My
Yeah.
faith is firmly planted and rested in Christ and has been for a long time now. But as you look back, if that is the starting point, like 6 or 7, you can kind of look along the way and there's almost like these other pivotal moments where things that almost feel like second conversion experiences because of the grasp and understanding changes. And I think one of those for me, I think things were pretty much just normal growing up. I didn't have any crazy rebellion. Wasn't special. It was just kind of a normal childhood. I went to college. And I think up until going to college, my understanding of the gospel, and this wasn't even necessarily because I was taught this. I think it had more to do with just my natural legal heart
Mm,
than necessarily being specifically given this by my parents or my church. But I very much had the idea that the gospel and the work of Jesus got me in, and then he handed the baton off to me, and
mm,
now it was my job to do the work of sanctification, right? To keep God smiling upon me with my work and my effort. And so my experience of the Christian life up through that point, as I was moving through my teen years, and it started to become more of a thing I took seriously, was basically every day was kind of this referendum on my Christian life. I got up and there were certain things that I was supposed to do. I was supposed to, have a quiet time of some sort, prayer, Bible reading, these sorts of things. And I was supposed to not do these other things. And those lists seemed to grow and get longer on both sides as I grew older and understood more things, and different temptations came my way and things like that. And um, the Christian life became something that was um, very burdensome to me. I wanted it. I believed it was true. I believed what Christ did was true. I believed I needed it. I believed I was a sinner. All of that stuff was there. But what the Christian life felt like was this constant need to prove myself, to maintain what I'd been given in Christ. And it really sucked any kind of joy out of it. Um, I, I wanted heaven and not hell for sure. So
mm.
I was going to grind it out, but
Yeah.
it was not my communion. My experience of communion with the Lord and everything like that was very much seen through this very legal lens of performing constantly, and my obedience was driven much more by fear than it was a delight and love for the Lord. And that was really the case till I got to college. And then I went to college and it felt like this was kind of this change, right? I'm now an adult, at least theoretically. I've got more freedom, I have more choices. And I started to wonder, like, why have I been doing this? Even like, it wasn't like a hardcore deconstruction sort of thing, but it was asking, like, have I just been doing this because this is what I was raised in, and this is what, or do I really believe this? Because this is hard and I'm not enjoying it. It's difficult. Why? Like, why? Is it just because it's habitual now? And so I really started to wrestle with that. And thankfully, the Lord led me to a good church in my college town of Birmingham, Alabama, and a couple other uh, men adjacent. The guy who was in charge of college ministry at that church, his name was Joel Brooks, and then another guy who worked for a campus ministry called Campus Outreach. So PCA college ministry, kind of southeast only, and they kind of focus on smaller liberal arts colleges. So they're not everywhere. but there was a regional director there, and we met and kind of connected as well. And those two guys in particular really helped me to start to understand the nature of the gospel in a more deep way, and started to kind of expose that legalism. One of the ways they did this was the fact that they would confess sin to me very openly and honestly. And uh, up this point, I kind of done that in a very cursory way. I would confess enough sin to, so that people would think I was doing it.
Yeah.
But the real sin is stuff I all wanted to hide, right? That was stuff I didn't want to see, because I had this very legal mindset of like, oh no, that's not what Christians do. That's not what this looks like. And if that is what's going on with me, then that's bad. So I need to bury it and hide it. Because quite frankly, I just didn't fully understand the work of Christ for me and what it truly meant to be in him. So those two men really started to help me see and understand that. Not even directly first through teaching, but just through the way that they lived their lives. They understood it and lived in such a way, and the way that they lived the Christian life was so different from mine. For them, it wasn't this laborious thing; it was a joy and a delight. And at the same time, they were able to confess sin and live an open life, and they weren't just absolutely crushed by their failures when they came. And that's what I was always constantly wrestling with, right? I would go, I would white knuckle, 3, 4 days a week of, doing the lists of things and not doing the other list of things. And then something would fall, and I would just kind of spiritually spiral out and be like 2 weeks or a month of just almost giving up before feeling guilty enough to get back up and try. So it was this pendulum swing between this legalistic pietism over to this almost this antinomianism when I would fail because I couldn't do it, so why even try?
Yeah.
And kind of bouncing back and forth between those things until that time. And it was throughout those 4 years at college when I finally started to understand really what the gospel meant, and started to be able to understand the distinction between the law and the gospel, rather than blending the two, and the realization that my salvation in Christ was not a little bit of help to be better, right? But it was being united to Christ by faith, having him as my new head, which meant that all that he merited was mine, and
Yeah.
that he took on all of my demerit and took that to Calvary. And I
Yeah.
could have said some of that wording and stuff, but I didn't really understand that I stood fully and only in the righteousness of Jesus. It wasn't Jesus helping mine out. It wasn't Jesus making up for where I lacked. It was wholly and totally him.
Yeah.
And that just sparked a freedom and a joy in the gospel, and a love for the Lord and the things of God, and everything that I just hadn't tasted really since probably that kind of that first time praying the prayer, and this understanding of like, I'm going to go to hell. I don't want to do that. And the freedom from that was kind of a first taste, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. I didn't understand the fullness of what I'd received really until that season of life. And
Yeah.
that was a massive shift and change for me.
Yeah. That's so interesting. One of the things that I just enjoy in putting some of these episodes together each week, and just, just working my way through some of your sermons, is just hearing you talk about obedience. We would all agree that obedience is important, and works and what we're doing is important, but just the proper place for it. And so that's just one of the ways that you just tell that God is brought about a new perspective for you over the years. You could just see that imprints of that just through your preaching, and just making sure to clarify, just that law and gospel distinction and the place for works in the life of the Christians. It's just, yeah, just interesting to hear more about kind of that journey for you on that personal level, and ultimately how that affects your pastoring today. So that's just, yeah, that's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's one of the things we say things like law gospel distinction. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean gospel and then law exclusion, right?
Right.
Right. The
Right.
law and gospel, when it's blurred and it's not distinct, you end up losing both,
Yeah.
right? It's not that, and so the law gospel distinction doesn't get rid of the law for just this grace thing. It actually gives you the law back in the right way for what it's meant to do. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I came to realize as this was coming was that my obedience before that, when I was obeying to try to preserve my standing or make God happy with me and all these other things, it wasn't even true obedience,
Mhm.
right? Because if the law, Jesus summarizes and says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, that the common characteristic between, those two aspects of the law is that they're outwardly focused. And my obedience was completely focused on myself. I'll sometimes call it spiritual narcissism.
Mm.
The acts of love that looked like love to God that I was doing were all for me. They were for me to secure myself, for me to preserve my standing, my acts of love for other people, even though they may have externally looked like love. And the other person may have even been loved by them in the sense that they helped
Yeah.
them. I was using the people
Mm.
I was loving as a way to prove my worth, to do enough to be okay.
Yeah.
So the fact that I didn't understand the gospel and my true the sufficiency of Christ for me actually gutted my ability
Mm.
to truly obey. And that was another one of those kind of light bulb moments of like
Yeah.
I can't get to obedience this way.
Mm.
I can't uh, law gospel blend beat people into true obedience. You literally can't get there. In fact,
Right.
all you do is take away the only true source of true obedience, which is
Yeah.
resting on the sufficiency of Jesus. Only then are you free to actually love God and
Yeah.
love others because you don't need anything anymore out of your
Yeah.
obedience. You're not
Yeah.
doing it for something for yourself anymore.
Yeah. Mm. That's a good word, man. Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, just to learn more about, yeah, just that journey for you and God just bringing some clarity and removing kind of the scales from your eyes and some of those ways just in terms of what you were just talking about. I'd love to maybe just hear more. Like we've heard kind of some of Patrick the Christian and bringing you to faith and just teaching you and helping you to more clearly understand the gospel more and more along the way and the law along the way. But yeah, I would just love to hear more about Patrick the pastor and really what led to that. What from becoming a Christian to then ultimately you're in a church plant now. You're pastoring. Yeah, I just would love to hear more about kind of that process and what led to that because it was kind of a not to spill the beans. It was kind of an unconventional path to that from what you were doing occupation wise before that and that whole journey. Would love to hear more about just how you became a pastor.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that really kind of picks up right where I left off in
Mm.
college, and but in a circuitous way because I absolutely did not want to be a pastor when I was in college. I knew
Yeah.
that for sure. Even as this love of the gospel and seeing and understanding the work of Christ in new ways was taking hold, I absolutely knew I didn't want to do that. But I wasn't sure, where I wanted to go with this. I went to college thinking I wanted to do law and possibly
Mm.
go into politics. Then I started, working a little bit in both fields and did not like the reality of them nearly as much as the ideal that was in my head.
Mhm.
So I ended up going in the Marine Corps. Went
Mm.
into the Marine Corps as an officer, and I served there for 4 years. And that was very, very good for me in a lot of ways. It was hard. It was very different. I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian college. I'd always been kind of in this very Christian, at least culturally Christian sort of bubbles. And the
Yeah.
Marine Corps is not that, in case you were wondering. Very, very different culturally. It
Yeah.
was it was hard to find another Christian. So that was very, very different for me. Um, but that did some good things for me. One, that helped me love the church
Mm.
in ways that I didn't before.
Mm.
I'd kind of grown up, and again, this wasn't even directly from teaching, it's just kind of what I came to on my own. So that kind of the church was for, that's kind of the basic level thing. Anybody can do that. Anybody can show up at church where real Christians are made, and the other is in the other stuff you do, right? And what you're doing in your quiet time. And, that's where the real committed people showed up. So I almost had this, you know, this almost degrading view of the church where this is like, yeah, this is for all the, this is for all the people who can't do anything else. And I'll still show up because I should. It was during that time in the Marine Corps where I did not have a lot of fellowship and did deployments and things like that. So I wasn't even really, I went to a church when I was back, but I wasn't really part of the body in a sense to really show me my need of the church first and foremost, that I wasn't this strong individual,
Mm.
you know, Lone Ranger Christian out there on my own, and that the church was God's design. And
Yeah.
I absolutely needed it. So that started to turn my heart that way. So that was going on. But simultaneously, I did 2 deployments to the Middle East during my time, and my job was largely working with locals over there. There was a small team, and I was working with locals there, and all of them were Muslim, and so I was interacting a lot with them over religion. They are not shy about talking about religion, all the things you're not supposed to talk about at Thanksgiving, religion, politics, all that. They talk about all of it. Very different culturally as far as that goes.
Hmm.
Find the thing you're going to fight about, and that's what they want to talk about, right? So there was no holds barred there. But it continued to just reinforce what I was seeing about the gospel, to just see the weight and the load that they faced under Islam, and
Hmm.
just pure legalism,
Yeah.
right? They have law from Allah, and they're supposed to do it, and everything is counted and recorded. And if they do it well enough, maybe they get in, and if they don't, then they don't. And it's just
Hmm.
it's pure legalism,
Yeah.
and it was kind of painting out this really stark contrast to what I was seeing about the good news of the work of Jesus on my behalf. And as that was happening, the Lord started to shift things into my heart to where my favorite thing to do over there, and I had a job I liked in the Marine Corps, I liked my work, but what I loved doing was talking about the gospel. What I loved doing was giving people that freedom, not necessarily the freedom I was fighting for in the more
Yeah.
conventional sense. And that just continued to grow. And so when in between deployments, I did finally get more plugged into a church out in California. That's where I was stationed, and brought that up with my pastors out there and asked them to kind of, pray about what things ministry, potential future in ministry would look like for me. At that time, I was thinking missions, maybe back to the Middle East, given
Hmm.
the fact that I'd spent all this time there and had learned some language and some other stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so they did, and they were already of the mind that I should possibly consider ministry, which I didn't know at the time, but they were already doing that before I even said anything. So all that wrapped up, and I decided to get out of the Marines after 4 years. I took an internship with that church out there in California, and I'll use my GI Bill to go to Westminster Seminary, California, and pursue graduate studies there. And that was huge for me. I still wasn't sure if I was called to anything, but it felt like the right next step. And Westminster was incredibly helpful because I started to get categories for things that were starting to make sense, but I didn't
Hmm.
really know what they were. Things that, I couldn't quite put the pieces together from my kind of broader evangelicalism from growing up. Um, I found out there was like, oh, there's an answer for that, and this is what it's called, and this is what was going on over there. So I
Yeah.
started to get categories like covenant theology and law gospel distinction and the ordinary means of grace, and all of these things. And these were all, I was already kind of moving that way, or kind of hovering around the target, but I didn't have any of these categories. I didn't
Hmm.
know what these things were, and so I got those there, and that was such an incredible gift. That time was very very, very important for me, and I'm very glad that I had it. Thank you to all you taxpayers for funding it through the GI Bill. Appreciate that, allowing me to go there. At the same time, so I'm working as an intern at my church, and I'm basically doing pastoral work. My internship job description was basically a pastor's job description who left, and they said, "Do you think you can do a lot of these things?" And it's like, I'll try. So I jumped into the deep end with stuff like that, and it seemed like it was a good fit right from the jump. And I was brought on as ordained as an elder a couple years later. So before I even finished seminary, it was in my last year, they brought me on. So then I really dove into the work of pastoring, and that was good. It was great to have seminary, and then to be working at the church at the same time, because I was basically getting these categories theologically, academically, but then I'm working with people, with sheep. And
Yeah.
so there was this process. The church I was at was more broadly evangelical, Calvinistic, but not some of the other Reformed things I was learning. And so started this process of these things I'm learning over here more in the Reformed tradition that I'm seeing and understanding and that I'm on board with. And now I'm pastoring over here, where I'm welcome there, but I've got some distinctive things. And I've went through this process of kind of sorting out how important are these various things, right? If
Yeah.
if this particular category or understanding of things isn't here, how does that practically impact actually shepherding and caring for Christ's flock? And as went on, and as I continued to study and continued to pastor, my convictions really deepened about the fact that these weren't just, little theological categories I could have in my head that were good for me, but they were absolutely essential for pastoring and for pastoring people well. And that I really couldn't do it uh, without them. I would end up leading people more into the sort of thing that I wrestled with for, you know, almost 20 years
Yeah.
until the Lord thankfully led me to people who could show me some of this richness that I found. And so I didn't do anything quick. It was a long, slow process of kind of learning, growing, digging in, having conversations with those guys I pastored with, who didn't necessarily share those categories, but they were good men who I loved, who loved me, who loved Christ Church. And so it was a good place for me to kind of work things out, care well for that church, and just kind of refine my understanding. But then as time went on, eventually it got to the point where it seemed like God had moved me away from the missions thing a while ago. My love for the local church really began to grow, and I wanted to pastor.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of administrative sort of stuff, like executive pastor kind of stuff. But my heart was really more to preach and teach and do more of kind of what the other guy I was pastoring with was doing. And church planting had been on the back of my mind. And so I started praying and had my pastors there start to pray about what was next for me, because it didn't seem like it was staying there between the theological movement and just what it seemed like the Lord was calling me to. And so it was about 2 years of working through that with them. And interestingly, we didn't necessarily agree on everything. It took some working through stuff. I initially thought I was going to maybe plant a Reformed church out there, and that didn't work out. And so there was a point in which I didn't really know what was going to happen. We kind of crossed the Rubicon as far as, we need to go and do something else. But there wasn't really anything else on the table. And then one of the mutual friends that Josh mentioned earlier, John, we had become friends, probably about a year earlier, through another mutual connection. And we were talking, and anyway, things just rolling. He pastors a church in the city next to me in Spring Hill, Tennessee. And in the midst of kind of working through all of this, he mentioned the need for a church plant to the south of him in Columbia. And at the same time, I had been wondering about the potential of maybe coming out and working with him as doors had closed in Southern California. And that is what led to ultimately moving out here, working with him at Grace Reformed Church in Spring Hill for about 9 months while we kind of pulled things together and got ready to plant Covenant Grace. And
Yeah.
that
Praise
brings us to
God.
here and now.
Yeah. Yeah. And how's it going so far? You guys, you said you're 3 years old now. How's it been? What have been some of the joys and challenges? Maybe take a couple minutes of just sharing maybe some of the joys and challenges, how that's been going so far, and maybe share a little bit about the church network that you're a part of. I would love to just hear, yeah, about those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been great, and it's been hard. This is my
Mhm.
first church plant, but I've been adjacent to many church plants. My church in California was involved in helping a lot of church planters, so a lot of the challenges and things weren't new to me, in
Mhm.
terms of like nothing was very surprising, except for maybe the particularities of how it ended up playing out in our context. So when we showed up, there were two families who were interested in Columbia, and then by the time the spring had rolled around, about 6 months later, we had about 10, and we were meeting for Bible studies. And once we got to about 10, John and I were talking with the other elders at Grace Reformed, and said, yeah, it's probably time to start moving towards that. So started meeting with those families and talking about what the church would be, going over essentially membership stuff with some other things added in, just so they'd understand what we were doing and seeing if they wanted to come be a part of it. And by the time June rolled around, we had about 10 families who were ready and willing to go. And so we started, and I think the first service we had about 35 people, met in a little school over here, and that was great. But then 3 months later, we had about 120,
Oof.
which was wild. Not
Yeah.
anything I expected. And this is not a complaint, it's an incredible blessing, but most of the Reformed church plants I've been a part of, that's not normally what would happen, right? You just
Yeah.
kind of hopefully the Lord will be gracious and there'll be a family, here and there. But there's just a lot right away. There was a greater need here than we realized even in
Yeah.
planting the church. And that was wonderful and great and exciting. It was also hard.
Mm.
It was hard because most of the people who were coming to our church plant weren't coming from a reformed background. Some of them
Yeah.
were coming from a Calvinistic background, but some of the other things I've already mentioned, like law gospel distinction and covenant theology and emphasis of ordinary means of grace ministry, those sorts of things were very foreign. And so essentially trying to kind of walked on that little core we started with, we'd walk them
Yeah.
onto that over, 6 months of preparation before. And now all of a sudden we're outnumbered 3 to 1 with the new people who've come who don't have those things either.
Yeah.
And so that was not what I expected. And so it was just interesting trying to navigate that and trying to patiently walk alongside people, help them see and understand things that they are unfamiliar to them. They liked things, obviously they came for a reason, but they didn't
Mhm.
understand why or how necessarily. And as time would go on, they would have more questions. And so that was a very unique challenge that, and maybe not unique, I'm sure other people have had it, but
Yeah.
unexpected for me
Yeah.
anyway. A lot of the other things I kind of like, yeah, I've seen this before. I thought it would be like this. That I didn't
Mhm.
expect.
Yeah.
Um, and it was harder than I thought. It's just a long way and things just don't happen immediately. You don't sit down with people and have one meeting and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, I get all of that and I'm there.
Right.
Now
Yep.
you gotta have the patience to realize, where was I 20 years ago? I didn't know
Yeah.
any of these things. And if you'd said
Exactly.
these words to me, I would have been like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, Patrick, as we kind of wind down here, I'd love for you to just briefly share a little bit about the church network that you're a part of. You've um, journeyed into pastoral ministry, and you've moved to Tennessee, and you've been a part of this church plant for a few years now. But we'd just love to hear briefly you share just about the network of churches that you've almost for about a year now that you've been a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to do that. And it was kind of birthed out of the process of me planting. And as I came out to Tennessee and started working with John, both of us had, you know, in some ways similar journeys, come to discover these same things, and um, just really had a heart to see more people be able to have this kind of a church, right? To have these things that we didn't have for so long, and recognizing that our churches, as much as we love them and as great as they are, they're a drop in the bucket in terms of what's needed um, in terms of true gospel ministry. And so as we were, looking to do that, looking to do the church plant, we looked around for places to kind of cooperate and for partnership. Even our confession of faith, the Second London Confession, talks about the wisdom and goodness of being in associations of like-minded churches for help and support. We wanted to do that, but we couldn't find anything that was quite the right fit. And we felt like there was a little bit of a gap for churches that held this theology and had this demeanor and these sorts of emphases. And Justin was part of those conversations as well. And so as John was planting me, we were kind of doing it, kind of looking forward to what would it look like to pull together churches to see more of this sort of thing happen. And that's really where Grace Reformed Network was birthed, with that idea.
Yeah.
And so we did some work behind the scenes the first, 2 years after I planted, to kind of lay groundwork with Justin, John, myself, and another brother named Charles. And eventually last year, we were able to launch this network and had a conference on the front end, and then chartered with 9 churches at the end. And again, like-minded churches, same theology, same confessional, standing in the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith, same focus of emphasis on law gospel distinction, ordinary means of grace ministry, covenant theology, all of these things that we loved and saw as so important for keeping the church on the right rails were there. And so got that started last year, and our goal is just to mutually support one another. We pray for each other regularly. We hop on regular calls like this to encourage one another, to ask each other questions, things like that. So mutual support for the existing churches, but also the goal to eventually, as we grow and as God would bless with resources, to be able to partner together to help plant churches as well that share these same things. And so already starting to dip our toes in the water there. I've got a guy working with me right now who hopes to plant a church someday. So he's in a training process with us, and he would like to plant a GRN church. And then that's our goal at Covenant Grace, to plant out of him. We've got a few spots already identified that we would like to plant churches locally to us. And we're just going to see what God does there. And then we've got another church that was planted in Texas this year by one of our other churches that we're supporting, and is looking to come into the network this year too. So it's neat to see some of those things that were a lot of background work for years start to become a reality. And so we're really excited about GRN, and really hope it's a blessing to Christ Church and to his sheep out there who need a place where they're going to truly get Christ for them as the heart of the Christian faith, as they should.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure it's quite rewarding to see, and fills you with gratitude just to see that kind of take shape and come to fruition after, like you said, those years of preparation and praying over that and meeting. And so that's great. Yeah, if any listeners are interested in checking out more information on the network, I'm sure you can type it in, Grace Reformed Network. They have a website up where just share a little bit more about what they're all about, and also just more. I'm sure there's a church finder, I believe, maybe on that website as well, where you might be able to find one of their churches, maybe in your neck of the woods as well. But Patrick, man, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us, and thank you for just being a part of Daily Union. I know your voice each and every week is just really an encouragement to me personally, and to other listeners as well. We just want to thank you just for your heart for proclaiming Christ and the gospel, and just encouraging others in the Lord. We just thank you so much for taking time out to join us, brother.
Thanks, brother. It's been a pleasure. And if I have been an encouragement, it's just a testimony to the fact that we have a God who gives a great treasure in weak vessels, and it's certainly all of him. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and encouraging people daily in their union with Christ, and the sufficiency of him for them. And appreciate it, brother. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Well, hey, we'll catch you all on Monday as we get back to our regular Monday through Friday episodes. You'll catch Patrick every Thursday. Thanks again for joining, guys, and we'll see you soon.